Richard and I met through our mutual friend. Although we both disliked children and decided not to have any, his mother, Karen, pressured me relentlessly, saying, "Get pregnant soon." Eventually, on the first New Year's Day after our wedding, she declared,
If you're not pregnant in a year, you should get divorced.
overwhelmed, I buried my face in my hands. Richard was frequently absent, citing his work and hobbies as reasons, leaving our married life non existent. Having kids was clearly impossible. Then came the new year, 1 year later. Richard, speaking to his cousin, made a cutting remark about me.
I want mom to have a grandchild, but she's not pregnant at all. What a failure of a wife, huh?
That was the final straw. I let out a snort, pulled the divorce papers from my bag, and handed them to Karen. As per your agreement, since I didn't get pregnant within a year, we're getting divorced. Hearing this, Richard's father, Mark, stood up and announced.
We're the ones getting divorced.
Karen stared at him, dumbfounded. Karen, who constantly belittled me while exploiting me. Richard, who sided with her and trampled on my feelings. I've had enough. They'll regret treating me like a fool. I am Emily, a 40-year-old homemaker. It's been almost 2 years since I married Richard, who is the same age as me. We met through our mutual friend. An old co-worker of mine worked at Richard's company, and we had a chance to have a meal together. At the time, I enjoyed going to concerts on my days off as a way to de-stress. Seeing this, my friend suggested him, saying, "You have similar taste in music, and you'll probably get along." Richard listened to a wide range of music, from girl groups to rock bands, and was passionate about attending live shows to support the artists he liked. When we met, we discovered we liked the same singer group and hit it off immediately. Meeting after work to attend concerts together or watching live screenings in theaters became a delightful routine. Since starting my first job after college, I had been entirely focused on work and uninterested in romance. Richard and I shared both our work struggles and hobbies, making our relationship feel more like a comfortable friendship. Over time, I started to think that living with him would probably be a lot of fun. One day, when we had grown closer, Richard proposed, saying, "I'd like to date you with marriage in mind," and I agreed. After a year of dating, we got married and moved into a new apartment in a convenient location for both our workplaces. It was about a 30-minute drive from his parents' house. Since my parents lived far enough away to require a flight, it seemed likely that I have to rely on his parents more often in case of emergencies. As the eldest of two siblings, I asked Richard when we got engaged, "Have your parents mentioned living together with us?" He shook his head.
Both my mom and dad like to do their own thing, so they said they just want to live quietly together.
Oh, I see. I was relieved to hear that. However, taking those words at face value turned out to be a big mistake. The self-proclaimed easygoing Karen soon began making my life chaotic, even though we had just gotten married. Before the wedding, Richard had been attentive, considerate, and treated me with care. But once we started living together, his attitude changed drastically. Although he was the one who suggested dividing household chores, he stopped helping altogether, claiming he was too busy with work. To make matters worse, Karen started frequently summoning me to her house. According to Richard, Karen had a fragile constitution and often ended up bedridden. Since Mark, her husband, had taken up his new job after retiring and wasn't home much during the day, Richard wanted me to take care of her.
Emily, I feel dizzy. I don't think I can make dinner. Can you come help? My joints ache and I can't get out of bed. Please come by after work.
This happened about every other day. It got to be so frequent that I started to worry about her. Taking some vacation days, I took Karen to a general hospital for a thorough checkup. But the results showed no issues. The doctor suggested it could be an autonomic disorder, or it's probably just due to aging. Every time Karen called me, I would rush to her house after work to run errands, cook dinner, or pull weeds in the yard. Being in someone else's house was exhausting and physically draining. But looking at Karen lying on the couch, I couldn't bring myself to complain to her. What's even more puzzling is that she occasionally goes on overnight trips with her friends. When I brought this up with Richard, he brushed it off, looking annoyed.
She's just using her pension to have fun. What's wrong with that?
It wasn't about the money. I was worried about her health. After several months of this, I was completely worn out. One day, while Richard was lounging on the couch, scrolling on his phone, I cautiously brought it up. Hey, could you go help Karen sometimes? Without looking up, Richard smirked as he continued texting someone. She'd feel more comfortable if you helped her instead of me. And honestly, commuting to her house after working full-time is physically draining for me. Could you at least take over on weekends? Finally, Richard looked up, clicked his tongue in irritation, and replied in an exasperated tone,
Mom only calls you when she's really struggling. If you don't like going over there, we could just have her move in with us.
The way Richard said it made it sound like I was the bad guy, and it left a sour taste in my mouth. Then at least, please help out with the housework as much as you can.
I know. If I get home early enough.
However, Richard started coming home later and later each day, and eventually he began staying overnight at the office more often. When I woke up in the morning, I find him asleep in the bed next to me, having come home sometime during the night. We didn't even have time to talk. We'd rush through breakfast before heading to work, only to see each other again the following morning. I couldn't help but wonder, what's the point of being married? Meanwhile, Richard seemed to be enjoying himself, showing no signs of exhaustion. To make things worse, Karen, who had initially acted meek and humble, began bossing me around and making snide remarks after about 6 months. What I find especially frustrating is being constantly pressured with, "So, when are you having a baby?" Richard and I had agreed before getting married that we wouldn't have kids since neither of us liked them. But Karen seemed desperate to hold a grandchild in her arms. Recently, every time I was summoned to her house, she would ask, "Are you pregnant yet?" When Mark was around, she acted calm. But when we were alone, she would relentlessly throw passive-aggressive comments at me. That day, I received a message during my lunch break at work.
I'm feeling weak and can't make dinner tonight. Emily, come over and help. I was planning on making beef stew, so please do the grocery shopping too. And make sure to prepare the broth from scratch. No cheating with pre-made stock.
Understood. After finishing work, I went to Karen's favorite grocery store to shop, then headed to her house. While Karen laughed hysterically at the TV, I prepared dinner. During the meal, I had to serve her tea and refill her plate whenever she needed more. Once her dishes were cleared, I finally thought I could sit down to eat, only for Karen to demand a shoulder massage. Since Mark had gone out for a volunteer meeting after dinner, it was just the two of us. And so began Karen's usual tirade of passive-aggressive remarks.
Richard's cousin just had their second baby, and the neighbor's wife is expecting her third. So, when will I finally get to hold a grandchild in these arms?
Karen asked, her face full of dissatisfaction. Give me a break. How many more times would I have to say, we're not having kids, before she would accept it?
Richard wants kids too. Poor thing.
What? I couldn't believe my ears. The last time we had been intimate as a couple was during the first week of our marriage. Nowadays, Richard worked late into the night or early morning on weekdays. On weekends, he spent almost every week at underground idol concerts or events, followed by drinking with his friends. He'd always return home in the middle of the night or early the next morning. Given this situation and his cold attitude toward me, it was impossible to imagine that he genuinely wanted kids. A month later, we celebrated our first New Year's since getting married. At his parents' house, they hosted an annual New Year's Eve to New Year's Day party, inviting all their relatives for a feast. Summoned early in the morning on New Year's Eve, I was tasked with not only deep cleaning, but also preparing all the food for the holiday celebrations. Karen, who loved to show off, insisted on playing the role of the mother-in-law who successfully trained her daughter-in-law. She told the relatives offering to help, Emily and I will handle everything ourselves, and promptly kicked them out of the kitchen. Even though she made me do everything, she acted like it was all her effort. At sunset on New Year's Day, the relatives thanked Karen and Mark before heading home. Exhausted from being worked harder than ever, I was about to collapse when Karen, lounging in her chair, demanded a massage. It annoyed me that she barely moved all day, but still gave orders like she was in charge. However, arguing would be more trouble than it was worth. I obediently massaged her shoulders as instructed. Suddenly, Karen snapped at me, her frustration evident.
Thanks to you, I was humiliated today.
What? Did I do something wrong? Confused, I looked at her, only for Karen to start complaining bitterly.
Grandchildren, it's been nearly a year since you got married, and you're still not pregnant. Is there something wrong with you?
Karen then began recounting her encounter earlier that day with an old friend.
That woman used to have a bad relationship with her daughter, but somehow they made up, and her daughter married the son of an IT company CEO.
Oh, you mean May's classmate?
Richard chimed in from the same room, still glued to his phone. May was Richard's younger sister. Mark had gone out for his daily walk, leaving me bracing myself for Karen's barrage of complaints.
Yes, that's right. That unattractive girl managed to marry Rich, and to top it off, she had twins. She was parading them around the neighborhood in a stroller, showing off the daughter and her family who were staying with her. Such a nasty personality.
I couldn't help but smile awkwardly. She was probably just taking her babies for a walk. But Karen's paranoia painted it differently.
Calm down, Mom. It's not Emily's fault she's having a hard time getting pregnant. She's not exactly young anymore.
His words made my blood boil. He's the same age as me, turning 40 next year. How could he blame me for something when he's the one unwilling to participate in our married life? Karen shifted her gaze from Richard to me, her expression scornful as she declared,
Richard, you married the wrong woman. If you had married someone younger and prettier, you'd probably have 3 kids by now.
3 kids in 1 year? Does she expect me to have triplets? Stunned, I sat there speechless, while Richard shrugged.
Yeah, I think I made a mistake choosing my wife.
See, I should have objected to this marriage from the start. Now, massage my calves next.
Criticizing me while demanding a massage. What kind of person does that?
Oh, by the way, isn't May coming over yet? It's almost midnight.
Karen asked Richard with a displeased look.
She works at the department store, remember? She said she'd stop by after work, so she'll be here soon.
Honestly, prioritizing work over greeting her relatives, what's wrong with her? If she doesn't get married soon, she'll become the neighborhood laughingstock.
Karen fumed, a vein bulging on her forehead. Her outdated mindset was almost pitiful at this point. Tonight, May was expected to stop by for New Year's greetings. Richard had told me before that May and Karen had a tense relationship. After leaving home to attend college, May started living on her own and rarely visited, except during New Year's, with little to no contact otherwise. The last time I saw her was at our wedding. The impression of her as cool and quiet still lingers in the back of my mind.
I bet May doesn't even have a boyfriend.
Probably not.
Richard agreed, glancing at me and letting out a mocking laugh from his throat.
You know, both of you are just washed up as women.
I gasped. I glared sharply at Richard, but he remained unfazed and addressed me in an arrogant tone.
Emily, why don't you put in some effort to become a woman more suited for me?
Excuse me?
You always look so tired, don't you? It really brings my mood down. We're both busy, but you act like you're the only one, and it's annoying.
As Richard spread his arms with a smug smile, anger started boiling up inside me. I worked full-time, handled the housework, and spent what little free time I had taking care of Karen. Why am I so exhausted every day? Whose fault do you think that is?
If you don't change your attitude, I might just go find someone else.
Oh, Emily, if your husband's saying things like that, it's all over for you.
Karen chimed in gleefully, slapping her hands together as if she'd just come up with a brilliant idea.
That's it. If you two don't have a child within a year, get a divorce.
Great idea. Deadlines always help achieve goals. This might even whip you into shape.
Don't just decide that on your own. I protested, but my objection was drowned out by the sound of the doorbell. Richard checked the intercom and invited the visitor inside. It was May.
Hi, Emily. What's this? Work talk on New Year's.
Well,
Richard's voice was so loud I could hear it from outside.
Richard, smirking, revealed the details in a snide tone.
oh, I was just telling her. If you don't have a baby within a year, we'll get divorced.
May suddenly pulled out her phone from her bag.
Oh, Emily, I don't think we've exchanged contact info yet, have we? Can we do that now?
Okay, sure. After exchanging numbers, May left without even staying for tea. Richard and Karen continued chatting, so I was the only one to see May off at the door before returning to the living room. As soon as I came back, Karen's face twisted with disdain as she started bad-mouthing May.
She's so cold and unlikable.
Yeah, women need to be charming. No wonder she can't find anyone to marry.
Ignoring their remarks, I went back to the kitchen and started washing the mountain of dishes piled in the sink. Even after that, Karen frequently called me over, citing reasons like, I have a headache or my legs hurt, making me do housework at her place. And of course, she continued to pester me relentlessly about having children.
Half a year left until New Year's Day. If you don't have a child by then, Richard's going to leave you.
Meanwhile, Richard barely came home anymore, using work and hobbies as excuses. Hey, are you coming home tonight?
Stop asking me every little thing. It's annoying. If I have overtime, I'll just stay at the office, all right?
Frustrated by his dismissive tone, I snapped back. At least stay home on the weekends. What's the point of being married if you're never here?
Huh. Can't I at least go to concerts? I work hard and bring home a paycheck, so stop complaining.
And so, with these repeated arguments, the promised day finally arrived. Once again, Karen bossed me around with her usual overbearing attitude over the New Year day. Before the relatives arrived, she lounged on the sofa in the living room. After they left, she slouched in a kitchen chair, grinning smugly while scrolling on her phone. Meanwhile, I ran around preparing for New Year's, doing my best to suppress my anger. This will be the last time I endure this, I told myself over and over. That day, Karen was in an unusually good mood. The hot pot she had me prepare for New Year's was a huge hit with the relatives, who praised the cooking, inflating her ego.
The crab and scallops from Alaska are so fresh and delicious.
The broth is perfectly seasoned too. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm so glad. If everyone's happy, all the effort feels worth it.
Karen said with a beaming smile. For the record, I was the one who paid for the crab and scallops, had them shipped, and prepared the broth from scratch. Once I finished cleaning the kitchen, I finally thought I could have my dinner. Excited, I headed to the living room, only for my knees to go weak when I saw the table. All that was left in the 3 pots were scraps of green onion, cabbage, and carrot.
Oh dear, I thought I saved you some, but I must have forgotten. So sorry.
Karen said with a phony apology that only fueled my irritation. As I gathered the remaining vegetable scraps onto a plate and started eating, Mark pulled on my sleeve. Without a word, he handed me a plate piled high with crab, scallops, oysters, and vegetables.
Here, eat this.
Wait, are you sure? Thank you so much. Warmth filled my chest, and I couldn't help but smile. Karen glared at us, but pretended not to notice as I enjoyed the food. Meanwhile, a mountain of crab shells piled up in front of Richard, who sat there with a flushed face. Mark was far more considerate of his daughter-in-law than my own husband. Later, as the relatives began sobering up and preparing to leave, May arrived.
May, long time no see. You got here early this time.
Yes, I sped down the highway to make it.
Still working today. Sounds like you've been busy.
Despite her strained relationship with Richard and Karen, it seemed the relatives held May in high regard.
Yay, it's May. We've missed you.
The children ran up to her, and she knelt down to greet them with a gentle smile, meeting them at eye level.
I wanted to see everyone too.
Me too. May, can you play with us today?
Asked sweetly by the children, May responded apologetically.
I'd love to. But it's almost time for you to head home, isn't it?
That's because you didn't come earlier.
Karen's sharp voice shattered the pleasant atmosphere.
Your relatives' gathering is more important than your job, don't you think? Quit that job now and apologize to everyone.
Well, well.
Richard's aunt said with an awkward smile, stepping in to diffuse the tension.
May, before you go, play with my grandkids. They were so excited about seeing you today.
Thank you. But before that, I have something I need to take care of.
I nodded silently in response. How should I bring this up? As I struggled to find the right moment, Richard began chatting with his cousin at the next table.
So, I heard you had your second kid.
Yeah, I'm on parental leave, but it's been nonstop chaos.
Another boy. You're doing your part. Good for you.
Richard said, finishing his beer in one gulp. Then, in a resentful tone, he muttered,
My wife's useless and hopeless.
Hey, don't say that. You've only been married for only 2 years. You've got plenty of time.
His cousin tried to reassure him. Richard scowled and continued complaining.
I want my mom to hold a grandchild, but Emily's not getting pregnant at all. What a failure of a wife.
That's a harsh word.
His cousin stammered, glancing nervously at me. Richard ignored him, pouring himself another beer and adding,
If she were younger and cuter, maybe I'd feel like trying. But she's just hopeless.
That comment was the last straw. I let out a sharp laugh through my nose, stood up, and pulled out the signed divorce papers from my bag. I walked over to Karen, who was chatting with her sisters, and slammed the papers down in front of her. As promised, since I haven't gotten pregnant in a year, I'm divorcing Richard. Hearing this, Mark stood up and said firmly,
We're the ones getting divorced.
Karen's fork clattered to the table. She stared at Mark in disbelief for a moment.
What did you just say?
Amid the buzz of murmurs from the room, it was understandable that she might not have heard clearly. As silence fell over the room, Mark repeated himself with conviction.
I said we're getting divorced too.
Why all of a sudden?
Mark cleared the dishes and glasses from the table and placed a stack of photos and a report in front of the bewildered Karen.
You think I didn't know anything?
Richard, who had come over to our table, peered at the photos and report, letting out a strange noise. I had already heard the story from May, but seeing the photos for myself made me gasp. In them, Karen, wearing heavy makeup, was arm in arm with a young blonde man walking together.
Oh my, cheating with a man younger than your son?
Is he a host? And look, they're kissing in this one. Incredible.
The aunts, who had also examined the photos, shot Karen disgusted looks, likely fueled by a mix of jealousy and outrage. Karen, sweating profusely, rushed to explain herself.
No, he's not a host. He's a bartender. I was drunk and just went on one date. It was a moment of weakness.
Don't lie. We have a statement from the bartender saying you've been seeing him for 2 years.
May snapped, waving the report and glaring angrily. Even Mark, usually quiet and mild-mannered, spoke with a tone laced with irritation.
The person you claim to go on trips with a few times a year turned out to be your lover. While I naively ate the cookies you brought back as souvenirs, you were probably laughing at me in your head. No wonder you were always in such a good mood after returning.
Karen bit her lip and stared at the floor for a moment before looking up and snapping at May.
You're so loose-lipped. When we ran into each other at the hotel during the company trip, I told you to keep quiet.
I never said I'd keep it a secret from Dad.
May replied coolly. Given Karen and May's poor relationship, it was puzzling that Karen thought she could count on her to stay silent.
Do you enjoy ruining families? You're such a heartless child. That's why I can't stand you.
Taryn shrieked hysterically, her voice echoing through the room. May furrowed her brows and shot back in a stern tone.
You're the one without a shred of compassion, Mom. When I heard you were constantly summoning Emily and forcing her to do all the housework, I was utterly appalled. And you are lying about being sick.
Karen flinched, her shoulders jerking. May pressed her further.
You were in the track team and always bragging about how you barely catch colds and have never had a serious illness. You thought you could manipulate Emily to serve you, didn't you?
Shortly after last New Year's, I had received a message from May. She asked me to tell her if Karen was being unreasonable, promising to help as much as she could. When I told her about Karen frequently calling me over under the pretense of illness, May called me directly.
Don't trust her. She's just trying to exploit you and get you to do whatever she wants.
She later revealed that she had run into Karen and her lover at an inn during a company trip, and that erased any remaining trust I had in Karen. Honestly, my anger was outweighed by pity. What kind of person goes to such lengths just to control me?
Dad, you must have known something was up. Stop ignoring the problem and take Emily's side for once. Richard's always been completely under Mom's thumb, so he's no help at all.
Startled by May's rebuke, Mark straightened his posture and lifted his head. He turned his whole body toward me, apologizing with a look of genuine remorse.
I'm sorry, Emily. I had a feeling your treatment at her hands was unfair, but I avoided getting involved because I didn't want to deal with the trouble.
If it were me, I wouldn't take care of a mother-in-law like her, even if I were paid.
May said firmly, and her words felt like a weight lifted from my chest. Hearing this, Richard rushed over and accused me angrily.
Were you extorting money from Mom? You're so greedy.
What? Of course not.
What's that supposed to mean?
Mark opened his eyes wide, looking at me in confusion.
I heard that Emily was being paid for her trouble, so every time she came over, I gave Karen $50.
The shocking revelation left me speechless. Mark retraced his memories as he continued explaining.
Altogether, it was about $500 a month. I thought it was the least I could do to make up for the trouble Karen was causing her.
I turned my gaze toward Karen, who averted her eyes guiltily.
Dad, a person who treats their daughter-in-law like a servant would never give Emily money.
May snapped, making Mark realize something.
Don't tell me. You gave it to your lover? The money I worked hard for.
Mark's face turned pale. The relatives watched him sympathetically as his voice trembled with anger.
Mom, that's just wrong. Dad doesn't deserve this.
Richard muttered, breaking the silence. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Richard turned to me, his face contorted in anger.
What's so funny?
I'm sorry. It's just hilarious that you can say that while completely ignoring your own actions. Richard froze for a moment before shouting,
You came with me to concerts and events before we got married. What's wrong with supporting idols and artists?
I wouldn't mind if you were just a fan. But you're not, are you? I held up a few photos I'd taken secretly at a concert, raising them high enough for the relatives to see. In the pictures, Richard was hugging, kissing, and walking arm in arm with a pretty young woman as they entered a hotel together. Gasps came from the cousins.
I know her. She used to sing in the downtown area a few years ago.
She left her agency after some drama with her group, right? I heard she quit being an idol and now works part-time while composing music.
Some relatives nodded in recognition. I also remembered seeing her on a local TV program. She seemed to be a minor celebrity. I got suspicious because of how often Richard claimed to be working overtime, so I called our mutual friend. Turns out, he'd been leaving work on time every day. That's when I started following him after work.
Wait, you were spying on me? That's disgusting.
Look who's talking.
One of his cousins jeered, cutting him off. I ignored him and continued. When I spotted Richard at the back of a concert venue, a former member of her group approached me. When I told him I was Richard's wife, he advised me, Richard's cheating. If you want solid proof, let him think he's getting away with it for a while. He was absolutely right.
She's living a part-time lifestyle, right? But in these photos, she's decked out in high-end designer brands like she's rolling in money.
As he tilted his head in confusion, May revealed the truth.
That's because Richard spent over $10,000 on her.
$10,000?
Did he spend that much on CDs and merchandise when she was active?
Someone asked, but Richard remained silent, his face twisted in frustration. I decided to answer in his place. No, it's not that. After she retired, you wanted to date her, so you bought her tons of designer bags and jewelry, didn't you?
Shut up. It's my money, and I can spend it however I want.
Glaring at Richard as he tried to argue, I responded in a cold, logical tone. Oh, really? Even though I'm the one covering our $1,000 monthly rent and all our living expenses, while you only pay for your taxes?
Wow.
Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but he couldn't think of a single retort. I pressed on, relentless. After your company's performance tanked following our marriage, you put the condo under my name, didn't you? And now you've drained our shared savings. What kind of nerve does that take? Karen, her face pale and trembling, muttered weakly,
That's not good. What should I do? I promised to give him an $8,000 watch for his birthday. But I can't take on more debt, so I was going to borrow the money from Richard.
Richard blinked in confusion before asking,
Wait, didn't you have Grandpa's inheritance?
That's long gone.
That's a problem. Next month, I'm renting out an event hall for her birthday celebration. I was planning to ask Mom to cover the cost.
I was completely dumbfounded. Here was a man with a meager salary who relied on me to cover his living expenses while he spent lavishly on another woman. And on top of that, he still planned to ask his mother for money. Like, Mother, like son. He probably pretended to be some kind of CEO or wealthy executive to impress his lover, tricking her into thinking he was rich.
You're pathetic. Can't even cheat without relying on your mom?
Whether Richard heard the mockery or not, he looked ready to cry as he clung to Karen.
If mom's broke, I'm in trouble. I've sunk most of my paycheck into that girl, so I'm drowning in debt. If Emily divorces me, I'll be out on the street.
Richard and Karen clung to each other tightly. To an outsider, it might have looked like a touching display of family affection. But knowing the truth that they were a pair of fools struggling to fund their extramarital affairs, it was impossible not to laugh. May seemed to feel the same, turning away and shaking with laughter.
I'm the same. Every time I see him, he demands expensive gifts, and I've run out of money. But I have to support him. He needs me.
Me too. She can't live without me.
Chuckles rippled through the room as the relatives couldn't hold back their laughter. But the two of them were dead serious.
Richard, we can't afford to get divorced right now.
Karen declared, clenching her fists as if rallying herself. She pulled away from Richard and turned to Mark, her tone suddenly saccharine.
Hey, sweetheart, lend me $10,000. I'm not asking you to give it to me. I'll pay you back someday.
Watching this unfold, Richard panicked and dropped to his knees in front of me. Looking up at me, he pleaded desperately,
Emily, please reconsider our divorce. I'll even apologize for pushing you about having a baby. The ex-idol was just a fling, and you're the one I really need.
I was furious. How could he say such selfish things? But before I could yell, Mark exploded in anger.
That's enough.
The sheer force of his voice silenced the entire gathering, as if someone had poured cold water over the room. Mark stood up, his face bright red, glaring at Karen and Richard with eyes blazing with anger as he shouted,
Both of you, get out of my sight. Sign the divorce papers and leave. Don't ever come back to my house.
Oh, come on. A wife in need deserves some help, doesn't she?
Karen puffed her cheeks in frustration, her complaint instantly making her the target of the relatives' criticism.
How shameless. No wonder Mark's furious.
Richard's just like his mom. Emily, you've been so patient all this time. Poor thing.
You too. Get out already. You're a disgrace to this family.
Even Karen, as audacious as she was, seemed to admit defeat after hearing all this.
Fine. Who needs such unkind relatives anyway?
She huffed, sulkily signing the divorce papers. Karen then nudged the dazed Richard into signing and stood up, supporting him as if he were about to collapse.
I'll come back later for my stuff, so don't touch it.
If you give me your new address, I'll send it to you.
And with that exchange, Karen and Richard left the house. Although the annual New Year's gathering could have ended on an awkward note, the warm words of encouragement from the other relatives as they left lightened my mood.
Mark, let me know if you need any help.
Emily, I'm sorry our Richard caused you so much trouble.
I'll give those two a piece of my mind later.
Thank you. I expressed my gratitude and bowed deeply. The kindness from people who were practically strangers moved me to tears. May, who usually avoided coming to the house because of Karen, decided to stay overnight for the first time in a long while. Mark and May, Thank you for everything, I said after finishing the cleanup, preparing to leave. Mark lowered his voice.
I'm sorry for all the trouble my wife and son caused you.
May, on the other hand, spoke firmly.
Richard's going to try to drag out the divorce. I'll introduce you to a good lawyer right away.
It's not your fault, Mark. May, I'm counting on you. Thank you. After bowing at the gate of the house, I got into my car and drove away. Just as May predicted, both Richard and Karen resisted the divorce. They made outrageous demands like, "We'll agree to the divorce, but don't make us repay the debt." Karen tried to avoid repaying the $12,000 she had lied to Mark about giving to me, plus the $10,000 she secretly charged to his credit card, claiming she had no money. Richard also balked at repaying the $20,000 in alimony and the $10,000 he had taken from our joint account to give to his lover, totaling $30,000. At that point, I asked the lawyer May had introduced to negotiate with them. The lawyer warned that if they refused to pay, we'd take the matter to civil court, which would cost them even more money. Hearing this, both of them backed down quickly. Both Karen and Richard agreed to repay their debts in installments, which was a relief for both Mark and me. Although Mark kicked Karen out of the house, he had to give her half the home's value as part of the property division. Karen could have used that money to repay her debts, but instead, she spent it on her lover and began relying on Richard to cover her living expenses as they moved into an apartment together.
Richard, you got half the value of the condo from Emily, right? You're an employee at a big company, so you'll be fine even with debts, right?
No, I'm quitting my job, so I have no wiggle room at all.
It turns out that Richard had been spotted flirting with a former idol at a concert by a CEO of a client company. This caused the CEO to lose trust in him, resulting in the cancellation of a major deal. Richard's boss was furious, and he was effectively forced to resign from his job. Although he immediately started job hunting, he kept failing interviews for full-time positions and now juggles multiple part-time jobs. When the former idol found out that Richard had become a part-timer, she quickly dumped him. Similarly, Karen's lover found a wealthier woman and left her for good. Later, while Richard was working hard, Karen refused to do any housework and squandered the money she received from the property division on gambling. It also came to light that she had been secretly borrowing money from relatives without Richard's knowledge, which finally pushed him over the edge. The two of them began having intense arguments daily, leading neighbors to file repeated noise complaints with the police. After this series of events, Richard and Karen were completely disowned by the extended family, who cut ties with them entirely. Even after the divorce was finalized, I stayed in touch with Mark and May. The three of us often meet up for meals, and our relationship has grown stronger. Back when we used to meet at the in-laws' house, they always seemed stern and unapproachable. However, since Karen left, their demeanor has transformed. They are now warm, cheerful, and easy to talk to. Apparently, I've changed too, as May often tells me these days. "Emily, you're so much easier to talk to now." Recently, I've even started going to concerts by my favorite singer again, something I'd avoided since getting married. I often invite May along, and we have a great time together. Though my marriage with Richard didn't work out, I'm deeply grateful to have met a wonderful friend like May. While it's disappointing that my marriage ended after just a few years, I've chosen to see it as a valuable life experience. The painful days of enduring Karen's demands and Richard's snide remarks now feel like a distant memory. Just knowing I'll never have to see those two again fills me with relief. No matter what challenges lie ahead, I feel confident I can face them head on.